Uh, Thanks for doing this. I
Oh,
appreciate it.
no problem.
So go ahead and just introduce yourself just quick as you'd like.
Okay. I'm Angie Amico. I'm the owner of Life Changing Solutions, and currently I'm a relationship architect, and that's kind of what I do: support communities in the U.S. and Mexico.
Okay. So from a relationship architect, what do you do with that?
It's a form of coaching. I try to stay away, actually, from the title of coach because I think that a lot of people have just bastardized the term.
Why?
I know people that have read a book and suddenly they're like, oh, I can help other people, or have taken like a class and are really doing a disservice to the industry.
Does that kind of come from like the idea of other people trying to just help others, or what do you mean by just reading a book and then all of a sudden they know?
They do. I think it's twofold. For one, I feel that the some of the coaches have really made the industry like a little bit too glamorous, right?
As far as?
Kind of there's like a fake facade that is being projected, where coaches or life coaches have it all together, and they're living this amazing life and traveling all over the world, which can happen and does happen, but it's not real.
So do you think that that's maybe just how you feel about it because you've been plugged in? I mean, some people may be watching, don't understand what that means. They might have seen life coaches somewhere else. Maybe they do have a life coach or some sort of coach that helps them with this type of stuff. So where does that become industry instead of maybe just your experience?
Well, I think because I am in both in the world, in the industry, and I have met and seen both sides of it. So my perception is absolutely skewed and biased. I know people that have never heard of coaching, but then I've also met a lot of people that have heard of coaching, of the term, and the image that they have in their heads is of those coaches that I'm speaking about, where they're like, oh, you can live this, and it just doesn't seem real or obtainable to them. And then I've also met people that, and that's why I stay away from the term coaching, that have met other coaches that those are the ones that I'm talking about, that they may be doing it, to help and support others, but they only have read like one book, or I know I'm being facetious about it, but like their experience is so minimal that they don't realize that the damage that they're making is actually greater than the help that they're able to provide under the title of coach.
Well, I think you're possibly leaving out a little bit of context there, that it's not like you read 2 books and now you know better, right?
Right.
So do you want to share a little bit more about your background and why maybe some of this becomes a little more relevant?
Okay, well, in terms of my background, well, for one, I have a master's in mental health. Like, I sought out to be a therapist. I knew that I wanted to support and help people, in different ways. And at the time, that was the only way that I knew how in the moment when I was looking to be a therapist.
Right.
And then I came across a personal development training leadership course, and I recognized that was a better fit for me in counseling. Not to say that there aren't some real clinical issues, but a lot of it doesn't have to fall under the clinical disorders. A lot of it can be targeted and worked on under the personal development umbrella.
Okay.
The come from is very different. And I was attracted to that. So I became certified as a trainer, and I've studied and mentored under, some of the masters or whatever you want to call them. And so, yeah, I didn't just pick up a book. And not to say that there are some coaches out there that have been self-made. And I don't think that the academic side of it is as important as it is that what you do with it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you can study something, right, to like the atom and split it and really have a full understanding of how it works. But the application is really what it matters, right? I have met some coaches that don't have the background that I do, academically speaking, but they're just as capable of supporting and coaching others. The issue that I have is where some coaches, they just really pick up and even master one tool and they call themselves coaches, and they go out there and they start working with people and really not having a full understanding of where their clients are coming from and wanting to put them in this little box.
So I guess for everybody maybe possibly looking at this and saying like, well, I don't understand where she's getting at, right? What is that what have you either seen or what do you see happening in maybe that possible field with some maybe experiences that you've had? What is the larger picture that's not being looked at?
Okay. Well, and rewinding, because here's the thing. It's like, it started off by me saying I have an issue with, self-proclaimed coaches.
Right.
And so the primary issue, and like I said, is where somebody, let's just take The Secret. That's like the biggest book that's more commonly known, yep. Right? And, I know how to work the law of attraction.
Okay.
And that's the only tool or skill set that they're really good at. And so they go around telling clients, and I'll give you a specific example, but all you need to do is meditate and think positively and, it'll manifest. But there's way more to that, right? And in the hands of somebody who's not really, doesn't understand, somebody off the street, they can sit there, and this is a real case that I saw that came into my counseling center with full-blown clinical depression because she had been working with a coach, working the law of attraction, and she started getting into meditation and yoga, and it was almost like, I am visualizing my house. Why isn't it here? Right.
Okay.
And although I do believe that visualization and thinking positively and stuff like that is a great starting point, there's more to it. And so because she already had some issues, obviously this coach didn't create the depression within her, but he wasn't aware enough or competent enough to catch and notice like, whoa, we need to do a little bit more work before we can just sit here and tell you to meditate all day long.
So that's why I stopped you earlier and I said, look, I understand a little bit more contextually about your background. So do you feel that the background that you had, and you had a career in that for years, and so you had the academics, which I agree with you. Most of the time the academics is the same thing. You read a book, right? Mm-hmm. But now you went through that and now you actually went into the field. You did a lot of true patient counseling, and you've seen kind of the aftermath, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's because you are somebody that actually did it. So how does a person that maybe does want to be a life coach or does want to do all these things for some people, maybe in the good context, how can they know any of this stuff if it didn't come from a coaching course or a mastermind course? It came from your academic and then experienced knowledge of saying, wow, I've seen some people have a commitment to themselves. And I don't know, I'm sure I'll get this wrong, but the idea would be commit themselves to an ideology, right? That maybe doesn't yield the actual outcome that they're looking for.
If you're asking me from a coach's perspective, like how does a coach develop the skills enough to be able to support
so I'm
others?
asking you from your perspective of what you see that gap being between what, let's say, a coach enters this with full open heart and saying, look, I want to help people. I'm going through a program. It seems like this stuff can really work if applied correctly. But then not understanding this other human being that's there and understanding the possibilities of what psychological breakdowns you can create in somebody else, because that has never been part of your training to acknowledge that or to see it or to understand it, right?
To some extent, and that's where if somebody were to ask me, okay, how do I become a coach? Coming off the street, having no academic or theoretical background or anything. They're like, hey, I just think this is awesome.
Yeah.
The first thing I would say is study. You don't have to go to school, but study and learn different tools, and you start to process and create your own.
So what would that be? What would somebody study if you're saying study?
If obviously there's tons of coaching programs. right, available, and do your homework. That's also like super important. The due diligence of it is look into, because there's also schools that are saying, hey, for 199, 6 weeks later, you're going to be a certified coach. Well, it's like you're going to get what you paid for. So, really as a coach wanting to be in this field, you need to do the research yourself and find out what it is that these mentors or these other people are offering, what kind of approaches, and then study it, buy different books, find different mentors. But what I'm looking for is
what is the actual subject matter? I guess that's what really kind of comes up for me when you say this is, so you're still saying very generically, oh, you should go find more knowledge. But what knowledge specifically is it that you feel is lacking from, at least from your experience, the coaches that you've seen, to say, look, this is great what you're doing, but you have to understand that this over here, and that's what I'm looking for you to kind of speak into, is what is that this?
Okay. And that's what I was going to say. And I just didn't know how to like label it, but I'm going to use this as an example, right? Mm-hmm. Doctors study medicine and then they become specialized most, right? Okay. In whether it's a heart doctor, cardiologist, a podiatrist, whatever. In the world of coaching, it's the same way. So you may start off with the basics of coaching, right? The fundamentals, the different tools, how to look for different belief systems and break people through them, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But then look into yourself as a coach and be like, okay, what is it that I'm most attracted to, inspired by, called to, whatever you may refer to it, whether it's spirituality, money coaching, and find your niche and then continue your studying or your search or your quest for knowledge based on that. So it's really difficult for me to say, hey guys, this is the 1, 2, 3 on how to become a coach, because coaching is very individualized too as a professional. Mm-hmm. There's several different domains, and some of the tools and stuff do go in different domains and do mm-hmm. apply. But then as you progress, right, also know your limits. I think that's another issue where a lot of coaches and the life coach, they don't know their limits. They assume that matters of the heart, so to speak, and those tools can also apply to spirituality or business. And again, do some tools work in those arenas? Absolutely. But you can sometimes cause more damage than good if you're going above or expanding beyond your limits.
Right. So let's go back to your example, right? That you had somebody come into your clinic clinically depressed because they couldn't manifest that reality that they wanted, right? So they took it to a certain degree and internalized it, and now they created a psychological barrier, right? Mm-hmm. So in what comes up for me is, in doing so, now they're coming to you, you're going to have to treat that in a very different way. You're going to have to peel back the layers, I'm assuming, in a very different manner than mm-hmm. what is not taught in a life coaching kind of situation. So I guess that's what I'm speaking into, is that then what is it that you see that's actually missing from that field that's not being taught? Because you can say, and you're making a kind of a very broad statement, that, as long as you pay a little bit more, you should get better training. But that, I don't think that, and I don't think that's what you were saying, but maybe somebody out there kind of took it that way to say like, oh, maybe I'll just go for the most expensive class. And then it kind of captures it all, right? And I personally know somebody that has taken a course, very expensive. And I just feel that, my own opinion, I think there was a lot left off the table. It was very woo-woo-ish, right? And mm-hmm. they came back and they found maybe what they, you know what I mean? Like, you find what you go looking for.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So for me, I agree with you to a certain degree, and I've had a little bit of experience with you on this. And I really feel that because you do have an academic background in that, maybe you can speak into a little bit more and be a little more concise than being very generic. Because if I say it, it's an opinion. I'm not an academic. Does that make sense?
Yes. And so to speak into the coursework or whatever, and that's why I said it's up to the coach to do his or her due diligence. Right. And when researching the materials, the coaching schools or whatever. So that's what I meant by that. And again, it is very you know, I'm what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of cliche, right? But in some cases, you do get paid, you get what you paid for, and it's just really up to us to really do that research and not just say, "Oh, I took this class," and then going to what you were saying and speaking into that. I have met a lot of people that have even taken the courses, and it really it requires somebody to work simultaneously within yourself as an individual, taking in these tools, taking in, all the information and really applying them to your life and be able to serve others. Right. So it's like, and that's again, one of the points that I was making with life coaches and some of the facade and what they're projecting.
Yeah.
Like, my life is perfect. No, it's not. All of us have problems, right? It may be working really well. We may have, awesome things happening in our life, but is it perfect? No, it's not. And when working with clients, if you position yourself in the, I am perfect, everything's great, come to me, I'm the expert, there's nothing wrong with me, immediately when you don't have they're not focusing on the individual. So going back to this example, in her case, as I mentioned, the depression was already there. It already existed within her. The coach didn't cause this, but this coach missed the fact that while he stood in a very entitled, perfect, kind of,
or at least presented themselves
right,
in a very expert way.
Right. He would make her wrong. Right. And speak and feed into that depressive seed in her brain. And all he did was really just foster and grow the depression. And he didn't even notice, because the approach was like, well, you must be doing something wrong. You must be allowing, some of these, you're not being positive enough.
So what skill set, I'll press you even more.
Mm-hmm.
So what skill set was that person missing, the coach, to truly help this individual? Because we can't speak of it very generically, because yet again, some people haven't taken a class, they haven't done this process. So you need to look at that and say, well, if this is a statement that I'm going to make, and I really feel you're a very unique individual to make it because you do have an academic background. I'm saying that then maybe you should speak into that to say very specifically, you lack this skill set. And the only way to get that skill set is how?
Well, I'm not going to say skill set. It's competencies. There's certain competencies that are within that require, of course, because anybody can learn how to pick up a hammer and just start smashing away. Right. But that doesn't make them an expert in construction. Right. That doesn't make them a carpenter. And I think that's what's missing, is those certain competencies where I may know and have full knowledge of how the tools work, which is why I was saying, academically speaking, the theories, right? We can all master those theories, but it's the application. And I think the competencies is where the gap is. So being able to be present with the client and be able to see beyond what and listen beyond what is being said, right? Track patterns, being able to connect with them, and really explore in a neutral space. What I mean by that is sometimes, because like with the example over here that I was saying, he kept making her wrong, right? And asking, well, are you doing this? And she interpreted, and also being aware of the person's worldview and interpretation. Because it doesn't matter what I think, right? If I think that you're doing this meditation wrong and I'm imposing that on you, who's coming to me for support, I am now causing damage. Because I'm not aware that you are interpreting as I'm making you wrong, you suck, and putting you down, feeding that depression side.
So I guess I'm confused. And this is an okay thing, because that's what I'm doing this for, is to learn. So we would say this. So is the challenge that the person is presenting themselves as an expert, and then you come to an expert and the expert says this, so you take it at face value? Or is the challenge that this person is trying to do the best that they can with the tools that they have, but they don't have the skill, the tool set, or the skill set to uniquely handle that person?
It's a both and. It's like I said, in coaching, my experience is that you are simultaneously working on yourself and supporting others. So what I mean by that is it's like every day I get to look at my limiting beliefs. They still exist. I still get to use those tools on myself. And then if I'm going to support myself or support somebody else, right, which is what I call or refer to as when I coach somebody, and they come to me, I need to recognize that in that moment, it's not about me. Even if there's something that I just don't like about them or something that's bothering me in that moment, I am present with them and I get to tune in and tap into whatever is happening with them and listening to them while still holding my own personal views back.
So is that a skill set that you acquire doing therapy?
Yes, but there's also, having been through some of the coaching schools, that is something that is also taught. It's just active listening and being present. The language is a little different, but the foundation of it is essentially the same.
So if from your opinion is that if it is that central to unlocking that potential of helping people, then do you feel like they just don't do a good enough job in some of those schools that you went to say, look, let me express to you, let me tell you, or let me have you guys understand the value of this and how important it is and what you could see some of the shortcomings that you might experience, as far as saying, let me point out that this is that important? Or is it like, hey, that was one quick chapter in 12 chapters and it kind of got lost in the jumble? Like, which one makes more sense to you?
I don't think it's the school's fault or even the coaches or anything. Like, there's a level of personal responsibility no matter the title that you have. And it's like what I share with my clients, and I tell them, you can go buy a membership to the gym, but that doesn't automatically guarantee that you're going to lose weight, get fit, or meet those health goals, right? You actually have to go to the gym and work out and put in that effort. And the same goes for anybody who wants to be a professional in any industry, I think. You can go to school. Even just me having the degree doesn't mean that I would have been a good therapist. It's me putting in the application, me actually making the effort to learn and really become an expert in this industry. So I have seen some coaches that have come out of really great schools, but what they did is that they, I actually refer to this as the tools that are taught, they weaponize them.
What do you mean by that?
Tools are meant to help support and build, right?
Okay.
When somebody weaponizes the tools, again, using the hammer as an example, right? The hammer is a great tool to be able to put your coffee table together. It's also a great tool and or weapon to smack somebody in the head and cause some serious damage.
Well, hold on. Let me say something to that, because I think you've heard the saying before where if you walk around with the hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And I think that's kind of what you're saying right now, is that if I have these 5 skills, well, one of the 5 skills has to be the way that you handle this, right? Is that kind of what you're getting into?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's why, earlier I mentioned, I think the greatest thing that anybody can do is know their limitations, right? And that's where the example of the doctor came into play. If I'm not going to go, and again, there's a shared responsibility. There's also the client responsibility. So using the medical example, if somebody needs to go see a cardiologist, they must look for a cardiologist, right? If they have heart problems. If they're looking to have their ankle reset, they go to a podiatrist.
I don't know if that's a good example. We understand the current state of our healthcare system.
So right. Well, that's a whole other thing. Right. But what I'm saying is
but it's funny, because isn't this exactly what you're speaking into, is that somebody's going to say, I'm a life coach. They're going to go look for a cardiologist. They're going to go see the cardiologist, and they don't know whether the cardiologist is good or not until after a few visits. And you're like, wow, I think I need a second opinion. So if that is true in both of those, right, how does somebody do their due diligence on a life coach or to look for somebody like you, right? Like, how do you do that? If
Ask questions. Because here's the thing, I may have a spectacular resume, right? But maybe even my personality may not be a match. My style may not be a match.
But who do they ask?
You have that conversation. That's what a lot of,
With who?
With the coach. So for instance, if you and I,
Mm-hmm.
if you were seeking, to get support,
Mm-hmm.
you and I would meet. I know my limitations and I say, okay, this is my scope. This is what I do. This is how I do it. I would also ask you some questions to make sure that what you're looking for aligns to what I'm doing and even your personality, right? Some people don't like the tough love approach that I offer. And so I simply say to them, okay, we're not going to be a good match. So that's my ethical practice. That's my...
And where did you get that from?
Actually, both from the coaching and but primarily from the counseling background.
So you see, I keep pointing the duality because you're a unique person. I don't know of very many people, and I don't know if I'm a good use case of this. I know a few coaches, but not,
Mm-hmm.
probably the amount that you do. But in that, I do understand that they all come from their very unique background.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've met some people that I felt that were phenomenal. And I think that's because it came with experience. They were much older. They had been doing it for decades. So there was probably a lot of mistakes, because if you meet somebody very talented, it means that they made a lot of mistakes and they learned from them. And that's how they became very talented, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't just happen. So being unique, that you have that duality understanding, I think you more apply it back, because unless I'm wrong here, where you're saying that the school that you went to was very uniquely, how can I say, imparting in their students this very specific need of, you need to understand whether it's a good match. And I say that because some of the schools that I've experienced don't have a qualifier. They talk to you, they get to know you, and I've never heard anybody say, no, this is not something we can deal with. It's been, sure, we'll figure it out. So,
And so that's going back to why I stay away from the term coach, for that very reason that you're speaking into. You have some coaches that have even volunteered in a leadership program, and that now they walk out of this saying, I am a coach, I am a life coach. And that's where the danger is, right? So not to say that they don't have the capability, but there's this godlike quality that they walk out of, like, I can handle everything. There's like, nothing is impossible. And no, that's not real, right? And that's where on the coach's end, you've got to look at yourself and really know what your limitations are. I'm sorry, it may not seem very positive, but there's such a thing as toxic positivity, where you can cause more damage, right? And so I just ask, and I really, what's the word? But yeah, I'm just going to say, I ask every coach to look at themselves and take that step and really acknowledge, are they capable of serving everyone or be niche based?
So do you think that some of the challenges that there is no certification, no governing board, nobody to say, I certify that you have at least the minimum requirements to be a quote unquote coach?
Actually, now there is. It's the ICF. It's the International Certification Coaching Federation or something like that.
Is that unique to like transformational work, or is that just industry wide? Like, if you want to have a coach
for coaching, actually, to be a transformational trainer, there is no certification. There's programs out there or whatever, and the institution will certify you, but there's no governing board, nothing like that. The ICF, the coaching side of things, they do have a certification process. And so that's something else that you should look at and consider. When you're looking for a coach, that's a question that you can ask. It's the same thing. It's like, there's a shared responsibility on both sides, right? The coach to be able to do the due diligence and do right by the clients, and the clients also do the research and know what it takes to be a coach, to be an expert in whatever it is, and are they a match?
Okay, so for anybody listening to this or watching this that has interest, maybe they're like, wow, she made some great points. Maybe I agree, I disagree, maybe I need more information. What are some of the like top 5 things that somebody can do when it comes to possibly finding out, first of all, what type of coaching they need? Second, is it a coach or is it maybe professional help that should be reconciled? And then at the end to say, how do I go about the vetting process?
Are you asking from a client or a coach perspective?
I'm asking as the person viewing this right now. It makes a lot of sense what you just said. Hey, I didn't think about it in that way. I didn't even know that was possible or existed. So then I want to take that next step. I really want to figure out where I want to go and how to do this. So for anybody seeing that has that interest, then maybe you could say, look, these are some of the key things to look for when you go through this journey, or at least you're going to start it. So what are some of those that you would say?
So again, I'm going to take from the client perspective. If I'm looking for somebody to support me and help me, the first thing is really tuning in and honing in on what kind of support do I need? Is it I'm struggling in a certain area in my life, or does it seem that everything's not working? Because that right there is going to tell you, do I want a broader type of coaching that may not be very deep, but it's more of a superficial goal setting type of coaching, and that's where the life coaches come in? Is it a more niched type of coaching? And that's where relationships, business, that kind of coaching comes in. So that's where you start, right? And start to filter through. Once you actually get, to some of the people that you may like, most of us will have videos, we have information out there, see what it is that they have to offer and see if it resonates within you. The next thing is most of the coaches have discovery calls, consultations, some kind of fancy way of saying, hey, let's talk. Sign up for it. And at that point, ask the questions, and you can, Google nowadays, you can pretty much Google everything. So if somebody's claiming to be a certified coach, that certification can actually be Googled and looked up. You can also ask what kind of, it's totally okay for you as a client to ask the coach questions. That's the number one thing. It's okay for you and about the coach, about the experience.
So what if somebody says, hey, I'm reaching out to some people and they say that, they're kind of very attorney-ish about it. Like, you have to pay me for my hour to talk about whether I fulfill your need or not. Would that be a red flag for you?
For me, yes, because that's not how I operate. But again, it's all about the client and the match, right? Maybe the clients prefer it to be that way. Maybe the client view that as a more professional, like, oh, this person obviously is worth the money because, you need to pay for everything. And if that works for you, great. Because that's the other thing too. It's it's really hard to say, you're not good, you're good, this is awesome. It's all about the matching. Right.
No, and then I guess that's kind of what I really wanted to speak into, that what if somebody does get dissuaded by saying, hey, what do you mean I have to pay you for this hour? Like, I don't even know if I want you. Right. Mm-hmm. To be like, well, that's not one of the things that you're looking for. You're looking at, well, yeah, maybe you have to, right? Maybe they are great, but their time is valuable, and their time, in order to extend you the time, they have to be compensated for it. Right. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is that may not be one of the things that maybe should throw you off. It should be more of, okay, maybe this person's worth it, or, hey, I got off cheap because I just had to pay an hour and I know to not work with them before buying a program or buying a bucket of hours, or, I don't know how they do it, but.
And the packaging is very different. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. And also consider the person that you're reaching out for, right? If you have somebody like a Tony Robbins, I would not expect him to do free consultations. Right. And I would expect, I don't even know if he does do one-on-one coaching. So I'm just but somebody that he's well known, I would expect for him to have a team and you've got to, there's a selection process and you're definitely going to be paying for almost every step that you will, of the process. But if you get somebody, like me, I do the free consultation. And then after that, there is a price. You will find some coaches that are starting off that may do a lot of free coaching and let you know that this is part of their practicum, so to speak. So, but you get to ask, like, where in your journey are you? Right? Where as a coach, right? What is your background? So again, you go back to asking, and just because a coach doesn't really align to what it is that you're looking for, it doesn't mean that there's not anybody else out there for you. And personally, when it comes to professional ethics as well, if somebody comes to me and I pick up that it's not a good match, or if the client says like, this really doesn't work, I do provide resources. I will refer the client and be like, hey, well, I know so-and-so is doing this kind of work. And I would hope that other coaches would do the same and saying like, this maybe is not a good match, but I know that this person does, and that's another professional ethic that is taught in school, that I feel that some of the coaches also miss.
Is that just to create opportunity without having to be like, I'm just like a dead end and it didn't work for me? And, for maybe the person seeking this need, it's important to them to say like, oh, it's not you, but there is opportunity.
Well, it's twofold, honestly. I mean, for one, on a personal level, because I am, seeking to support others, I understand that I'm not the end all be all. Okay. So if somebody's coming to me in support and I can't do it, I'm not against offering an option, right? The other thing is from a marketing perspective, right? Or even a good vibe kind of thing. It's, I just hand the person over, and what happens is this person already knows what I'm about. And maybe later in their process, they're going to be like, hey, now I'm ready to work on relationships. Let me go back to her because in good faith, I referred this person out. Or they may even say to somebody else like, wow, I can't believe this person just handed me over, wasn't like just trying to, dig into my pockets or whatever. So, but ultimately it also supports the client itself.
My damn dog is barking.
Keep all going. Good. So it's just like, it creates a win-win, right? And it doesn't stop the person's growth potential or process.
Okay. Let me go handle the damn dog.
Okay.
So you just kind of finish up that so we can maybe get to that different subject.
Okay. So I don't know what it is that you want me to finish up.
Finish up speaking into like how somebody goes and gets that type of value.
Okay. Well, when you're looking for a client, or I'm sorry, a coach, and finding the value, it's also very important for you to know what it is that you're looking for, as I said. So when you're going and speaking to these coaches, find out what even your price point is, right? What is it worth to you? Sometimes, we tend to use these little buzzwords, but you can feel free. And please, I really urge people to be like, kind of like what Steven does, right? Steve does is like, no, like cut the crap. What does this mean? What does it mean for me?
Well, they don't know me like that, but they will.
Right. Okay, sorry. But, you're a pretty direct person where it's like, no, this doesn't seem to be hitting the mark. Like, what do you mean by this? And let's get clear. And if that's, something that you're asking, or maybe if that's not in you, right? Because some people are shy and that could be confidence building as the very thing you're looking for coaching on. If you don't feel confident enough to be able to assert yourself and ask those questions, then obviously it's not a good match. Not to say that you are not a good match for coaching. It just means you and that coach are just not compatible.
So maybe possibly go seek somebody else.
Yeah.
Find somebody that's maybe in a little bit more of an alignment to kind of what you want. And then take the plunge, right? I'm assuming that don't kind of get analysis paralysis. Try to find that person that you feel that this could be a good match. And then just take that next step. Right. The idea is like, don't wait.
Right. And take action. I mean, that's honestly even the one-on-one coaching for some people may be too much to handle. Right. And so they're not ready for that. Okay. Well, there's a lot of programs out there where they do online workshops or, so I think that's the most important piece is really getting out there and taking a step forward and create that momentum. And whether it's even going to, a leadership class where you have 100 people, and gives you a little permission to hide a little bit. But that's okay. Like, also know that you are in your part of the journey and you're exactly where you need to be, and just keep moving forward.
Okay. Well, good. So thank you for that, by the way. That wasn't expected, but I like that we went into this. Do you kind of want to chat into what you and I were kind of talking about the other day? I felt like it was a very good subject matter, and maybe possibly that, I don't know, whoever's watching this might have some sort of feedback or something like that. So to set it up, right, really what happened is that you had some conversation with someone. They had some, I don't know if I should be saying that. They had, that's horrible, but they had an opinion about it, right? Mm-hmm. So just for people watching this, whenever this comes out, it would be that there's been a lot of discussion on, pretty much any news channel that you're watching about immigration. What is the impact of immigrants? What are some of the, hopefully some positive things have been said. A lot of them have been pretty negative and kind of, it's almost like the immigrant gets the reason why things don't work, it's because of, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the approach that person took with you at the time that you were speaking about this, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So contextually, that's what was going on, and that's what you guys were talking about. What came up for you when you guys were discussing that?
Well, and first I'm going to say, and I'm not a very political person, right? I don't have a lot of strong political views, nor do I disclose what they are for those views that I do have.
Right.
What I share is what I see and how I feel about things. And what came up for me is it really bothers me when somebody speaks up and has blanket statements and knowingly generate ill feelings about it. So specifically about this, it was the immigration, and they were talking about healthcare, and should immigrants be getting healthcare, or actually saying that immigrants already received free healthcare, and that wasn't fair because our veterans weren't getting the help and support that they needed. And that's where I was like, okay, time out.
So hold on, before we go down this rabbit hole, how does an immigrant get healthcare?
Well, that's actually where I was going to go, and that's where I said time out.
Well, it's now my question.
Right.
So
first of all, let me just get this out of the way. There's, I don't even know how to say it, but they don't, to answer that question directly. They don't.
Well, let me be a devil's advocate.
Mm-hmm.
If a person that is an immigrant to receive healthcare, they go to an emergency room, they would receive healthcare, right?
And I was going to say there are some exceptions.
Okay.
But also so now we're looking at the immigrant, the illegal immigrant, and the veteran.
Oh, and I apologize. That is the contextual understanding that it was about illegal immigrants, not legal immigration, because then we would not call them an immigrant, right? We'd call them green card holder or citizen.
Right.
Go ahead.
So again, going with those blanket statements, of course, everything has an exception, right? And I'm not saying that legal or illegal people tend to play the system, but that again is not the entirety, right, of this, group. So the way that I look at that, and the comment was really, and giving it more context, is they were referring to like Medicaid, Medicare, like welfare type of healthcare.
So what do you need in order to get that healthcare?
First of all, a social security number.
Okay.
A legal social security number.
Can you do it with a EIN number?
Nope.
Can you do it with a tax number?
Nope.
So you would still have to provide proof
yes.
that you have a social security number that's valid. Obviously, you wouldn't just show a paper. They'd verify it, right?
Right.
And then you could apply for those federal funded programs for assistance, right?
Now, here's where I tell people, I'm like, educate yourself, right? Is it possible, let's say we have mom who's illegal and even dad, let's just say the parents are fully illegal, but they have 3 kids, the anchor babies, right? And then they go to the welfare office and they apply for health care benefits, or maybe even food stamps or any other benefits. And the family may be eligible for those benefits, but they are provided for the children. What I mean by this is the parents do not get health care provided for, the children do. Or then some people are like, yeah, but they're using the welfare as food stamps. Well, yes, but that's no different. And that's a whole other argument. Like when somebody provides child support, like this is like intended, the food stamps are intended for the benefit of the children, right? The parents do take advantage of it in the sense of they eat, but in even the way it's calculated, right? So may have the calculation is actually reduced. They get, like, if I was to go in with a party of 5, right, a family of 5, I would get more benefits as a legal citizen than somebody who has a family of 5, because what they do is that they count all 5, but yet discount 2. I forget the formula, but at the end of the day, it's not an even, process. And so, but going back to the healthcare, yes, in emergency situations, of course, the hospital is going to see them, but most of them actually don't go unless it's an extreme emergency.
Mm-hmm.
And the veterans have the same, privilege to that. So it's not that they're taking anything away from our veterans.
So, I mean, veterans have benefits. Mm-hmm. Veterans have their own hospitals. They have their own doctors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe some of the challenge or some of the difficulty with that person wasn't necessarily that one was taking from the other, but maybe the VA is just not that good.
Well, and here's the thing, but it's like you were asking me to speak into the conversation with this person. And as far as I knew, and as far as my understanding is, this person really did believe that illegal immigrants are taking over and taking away from citizens. And the example that he gave was veterans. And that's why I stepped in and I said, no, like these blanket statements, like you really just be careful with what you say. And yes, like even in cases with veterans, not only do the services, they're kind of sucky. There are some really great benefits that the military receives. But the other thing that we're forgetting is the veteran himself or herself. Some of these veterans do come back with some huge like mental health issues, PTSD, and they start engaging into substance abuse and they just
spiral.
The system
is it not designed well enough to handle that type of mental health issue?
It is. But again, going back to every individual has that personal responsibility, right? And so I don't care if you're a veteran or not. If you're an addict and you don't have the presence of mind, I don't care how great the system is. If you don't want the service as an addict, for instance, there's nothing that can be done. There's no solution for it until the person is ready and wanting to receive the support.
So in the conversation with this person, right, did you ever consider going into having a discussion about what might be possibly the challenge that they experience with this? Because to me, it seems like a very ideological stance, not necessarily one based on, a lot of objectivity or in the pursuit of facts.
Direct answer, no, because this person, I could already tell they were speaking out of a personal experience that to them was fact. What I mean by this is, of course, like I can say, oh, I know an immigrant that did start selling drugs, that did start, and feeds right into that stereotype or whatever. So,
but maybe they were right.
Right.
That they do know somebody, right?
Right. So, but what I'm saying is that's where I caution people to develop blanket statements and say that everyone's like this, right? So for this person, it was a very real thing that they experienced, as that somebody in their family did not receive great quality of care. And it's also very difficult too, because that's the other thing too. Sometimes you're blinded by the fact that you don't want to accept that this person, your loved one, right, didn't want the help. Or that person could have also lied. In the case of substance abuse, unfortunately, lying is a very common thing. And so they probably said, oh, the VA turned me away because there's not enough money. And so based on this person's perspective, it was very real.
Okay.
And so to argue all of that would have just been too much. And that's why I just went with the logic of like saying, hey, just consider the facts and just do me a favor and don't.
So you weren't there to argue with the person. You were there to just be a disturbance for them, to say, hey, maybe there's more.
Not a disturbance, I guess, an interruption. A lot of the time when somebody comes to me with their political like views, I rarely engage.
Okay.
But with this person, it was just like, you know what? I've had enough. And it was a combination. It was like, this was the straw that broke my back, so to speak, right? Because I've been hearing this. And I'll even share this. Like 2 years ago, I went to Mexico City.
Okay.
And I have a very different worldview and perspective on this whole immigration, situation, which is why I stay away from my political views, because I just offer my opinions, like things that I've seen.
So I think maybe a lot of us offer our opinions. I don't know if that's the right way we should handle things, but sure.
Right. No, and I'm like, that's the other thing too. I'm not educated enough. I haven't taken enough time to really say this is how it is. And that's why I always like preface things that way.
So where was your come from on this?
Well, and I'll share the story, the situation with you, and then I'll give you the come from. I was actually in Mexico City. And of course, over there, once they figured out that I was from the US, they wanted to have my opinion on Trump and the whole wall situation. And I said, I'm like, well, opinion based. And this was in a room, there was about 15 Mexicans, just kind of all staring at me, looking for me to be all. And I said to them, I'm like, well, maybe the wall's not a bad idea. And everybody's like, what? And, and I said, I'm like, but give me a second. Let me explain what my come from is and why I say that. First of all, like, okay, the price of the wall, that's irrelevant. But the significance of the wall, I believe, and this is something that I was sharing with you, the American dream is really hard for the American nowadays, which makes it that much harder for the immigrant.
So what do you mean by that? Just to be clear.
And then, okay, so back to the US, I've worked, and part of my experience is I've worked in social services and social work for 18 years. I have seen, multiple families pile up in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, right? Just to make ends meet, because now they feel that they have to support their family at home, which is in their home country. In this case, I'm being specific to Mexico, and also support themselves here. This creates...
And this is somebody that was illegally here.
Here. So, but it happens, right? You have multiple families in one apartment. That also creates a generational mental health issue. The kids are afraid to thrive and call attention to themselves because they don't want to stay, too far away from the family. Some of the kids are parentified too soon, which causes a whole slew of issues because now they have to take responsibility for the family because they're the only ones that are legal. So now they have to work, even translating for the families, all that stuff that creates a lot of issues. The kids are worried about, is today the day that my mom or dad is going to get picked up? And this is a generational thing. And so that really makes me sad, but the thought of that American dream and the possibility of it is what keeps people coming. The other thing is, in the way that I explain it, I don't go country to country. I just think of things house to house. I like to think that I'm a very generous, loving person, and I open my doors to just about anybody. But if it's causing problems within my home, within my financial means, right? If I have to choose between feeding my own children or feeding the children of somebody else, or if my children's safety is, an issue, then I have no problem shutting my doors and saying, I'm sorry, I just can't, have you here anymore.
Right. And you're just being forthcoming and transparent that I would love to help. I'm just not, I don't have the means to help right now.
Right.
Okay.
And I also feel that it's nobody's, and I, again, country to country, a little different, home to home, but still, if somebody says to me, oh, well, you have X amount of dollars, how can you say you don't have the money to, support somebody else? Well, there's a reason why I have X amount of dollars, right? Because I have financially taken care of what I needed to take care of. And I don't just, squander it away and give it away. I'm a very generous person, but I'm also cautious on how I spend my money.
Well, you're fiscally conservative, saying I need to make sure that I can take care of my family in the coming years. So I need to make sure I have like a little nest egg or some savings for, those what if, or those maybe, nobody plans on emergencies happening. They kind of just happen. So you're like, I'll be okay if I do happen to encounter an emergency, right?
Right. And that's where it's like, again, so from country to country perspective, if the country is looking at it from that point of view, then yeah, maybe we do need to take a break. The other thing too, from the Mexican side, and again, that's really my own my experience. And that's why I do focus on Mexico. I've gone there, I grew up there, and it really makes me sad to have my Uber or taxi drivers be lawyers, be engineers. Like, they're well-educated people, and they're still having to work these other side jobs just to make ends meet. And so I feel...
You're speaking about the people that you've experienced in Mexico driving for Uber are, licensed attorneys, or at least education-wise, went to law school, right, and had a degree.
Yeah.
And they just don't have the capability to make ends meet per se, or to maybe take care of their family and the means that they would like to. So they get another line of income by doing this, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And these are well-educated people that are doing these side jobs just to be able to, make ends meet and provide for their family. And so again, with the home to home example, I feel that by having that wall, Mexico would have no choice but to clean itself up. So, and build from there.
So you see, for a person that just started this conversation by saying that somebody should be a little more understanding and a little more objective of the situation, I highly doubt that a landmark would force the social economic issue that they have to be front and center.
Yes. And I completely agree with you. And what I mean by the wall, and whether it's...
And just explain that just quick. I'm going to have to go take care of my dog again. Just for 1 second.
Okay. So let me break down what I mean by the wall, whether it's a physical wall or the representation. For me, it's like the wall is what it means, what it's meant to represent, and that divide. And by having that wall, right, it's going to force people to be able, like, well, is it going to stop people from coming over? Absolutely not. I don't think that the purpose of what Trump is wanting to happen is really going to come to fruition. But what I'm saying is Mexico is an amazing country. I studied there. I live there. I think the culture is very rich. I think the education is actually way more advanced. Again, speaking from experience, I lived in Mexico City, was educated out there for, during my high school years, come to the US, and I was immediately way more advanced and tested beyond most grade levels, like 2 to 3.
But that's also not a secret to anyone. We understand their education system's a little lackluster.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is Mexico is such a culturally rich and really educated and smart community and country. I think what it's lacking is the solidarity within the community.
I don't know if I agree, but yeah.
An example, actually going back to that conversation that I was having, the reason I was there that time, it was Mexico City had just had an earthquake. It was back in like September, October. And I went down to do a mental health first aid training. And I said to them, it's like, people don't run away from good homes. right? I mean, they do. And again, there's always the exception. But
you're saying as a majority.
right.
Right.
And so if Mexico cleaned itself up, I really do believe that there wouldn't be that need to leave, right, as there is now. And so coming back to that, and I explained to them, like, let's just use an example. During that earthquake, minutes later, like human chains, right, like they call it, started to form. And they were literally with their bare hands and buckets starting to pull people from the rubble.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were just carrying and they were just doing all that they could. And when I asked, why did you do that? Like, oh, because people's lives were at stake, because they knew that they couldn't count on the government. And so my answer to that was, well, imagine if you live like that every day until you got this country back to where you needed it, where you could actually come together and help each other, right? And support one another to build this amazing country, because I really do feel that Mexico is an incredible country. What it's missing, and that's what I mean by that solidarity. It's like people tend to live in silos, right? And just kind of focus on themselves.
You see, that's where I think it's difficult because, you know, for full disclosure, I grew up in Mexico when I was a kid. I lived in Mexico for 7 years of my life. I went to elementary school there. And yes, the people there, the culture is very, family oriented, very similar to like Italians, same type of social structure. The thing that I believe is the challenge, and, take this with a grain of salt, guys. Like, this is just me kind of looking at things, and my opinion would be that the challenge is the corruption. The level of corruption in that government is from top to bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Top to bottom. And that is a now new economic system that exists. And when you're getting extorted because you have a business and nobody's there to help you, and you're not allowed to own a gun, and you the system is literally created so that you can't defend yourself, then you are empowering that corruption, right? Nigeria, a lot of African countries have this. Europe, I'm sure, has it. East European countries have this. It's all corruption ran because that's how somebody gets to elevate from a slum to being somebody, right? In their own way. I don't know if I would choose that, but that is the mechanism that exists. And generally it's, the law of the jungle, right? Mm-hmm. Whoever wants to be the lion, you kind of have to be that person. Now, I say that because what is the one driving factor that creates all this corruption wealth? Majority comes from the U.S., which is most people maybe watching this right now. If you've ever made a drug purchase of an illicit substance, it might have came through Mexico. Right. Not necessarily from Mexico, but transported through, right? And so everything that you purchased was a contribution back to some sort of outfit that is propagating that corruption all the way up. Now, that's the ugly side of it, right? Then you have people that run the country, create laws, and look the other way and never clean it up. So there is no government looking to balance it. Now, we have a system like that, I believe, here, and it's because of lobbying groups. So it's a little different. It's not, people getting shot in the streets and being very like peer-to-peer. It's very behind the scenes and very shadowy, right? You have corporate funds, you have lobbying groups, you have unlimited amount of money that somebody can donate, and, very experienced financial tools to kind of play that shell game of where the money came from. And unless there's somebody devoted to that type of research, it's probably pretty difficult. Most people don't necessarily care because there's no dead bodies hanging or body parts showing up anywhere. We don't experience that. We just know that, man, things could get better. if we elected the right person. We have this idea of an elected official is the one that's going to change everything.
Well, and that's where I completely agree. And that's why I stick to the people, and even going into this conversation, and actually just brought up another example in my head, but it drove me insane that this is when their former president was on his way out, and they have a nickname for that year. And I'm like, what does it mean? And they're like, oh, this is the year that he pretty much takes everything out of their version of the White House and steals everything. And I'm like, why is it that the people are okay with this? So I get it. The government is corrupt. I get all that. And I'm not saying it's going to change tomorrow. It's going to take probably, 3-4 generations to really overturn the whole thing if we really want to get realistic. But it starts today, right? Like, it's possible to start it today and start to teach our children that it's not okay to accept what is and make changes.
How do you create or start a change when there's so much financial backing? Meaning, there are a lot of families, politicians, people on that side that their means come from that illicit money, right? So most of us have heard the term like follow the money, and then you'll find out. So if that is true, then in my point of view, and yet again, take it with a grain of salt, we need professionals on here to kind of really dissect this, would be if we legalized all drugs in the US, which are already being consumed, there's a ton of money going to them. If we were to tax that as any other drug like alcohol, tobacco, any of the other things that with time we've grown socially accustomed to, right? Think of alcohol. It's a great example. People wanted to drink. Somebody got into government and said, no,
right,
you shouldn't. Chaos happened, right? A lot of illicit behavior came, and a lot of gangsters and people made money off that illicit trade. And then they made it legal again and realized that people are responsible, and some are not so responsible, and things happen, but you can't account for all that. You have to do what you have to do to create progress. So you said, great, let's legalize it again. All that craziness went away, and we started taxing it. And people were like, oh, thanks for, I want to be civil. I want to go get a drink, and I don't want to be hiding for it, right?
Right. And eliminating some of that guilt and pressure. And I don't have the direct answer, but all I can say to you is I would approach it the same way. Something else that I do is I consult with other behavioral health and counseling centers. And fraud is rampant in that industry. And whether it's on purpose or even systematic. And what I mean by that is they picked up habits from somewhere else and they thought that that's how it was. And so when they opened up their own business, they were doing it this way.
So it was just a way of doing business with the fraud cooked in, or it was kind of like the take where I know I could inflate and take a little extra because then that means I get to have a nicer car or XYZ.
A combination of both, depending on the client. But there were some things where I was like, nope, you're not. It's called unbundling, which is to bill for different services. There's just, and they're like, oh, I can't do that. Like, no. But then here comes the ethical question, right? And the moral dilemma for the business owner when I present this to them. Do we move forward with, now that you know this is fraud, now that you know this is not okay, do we move forward with it?
As far as?
Do we continue to operate under this fraudulent agenda, knowing that this is, and usually at that time when somebody says to me like, yes, this is what we're going to do because I can't let go of the money, that's when I end my contract. But if they say to me, well, you know what, I just can't afford to go back. I can't afford to lose this money, right? And just chop it off. What do I do? So the way that I operate, it's like, okay, let's be real, right? This is how it is. So I develop a plan where we're going to continue to operate the way that you are, but transition you into the legitimate way of doing the business. And there's going to be an overlap, right? To where eventually, depending on, anywhere between 3 to 6 months, and this is for a small business, of course, in a country. That's why I'm saying it's probably going to take generations. But I will work with them and say, okay, this is where we can do, this is different ways we can budget and handle the money and all that stuff. So if I had the ability, and to answer your question, that's probably the way that I would handle it and be like, accept what is, right? The corrupt government, and then slowly start to transition and work through it. Right now, something else that I believe, both in the US and in Mexico, citizens are very irresponsible by saying things like, and leaving it up to the government. Right? It's expecting the government to do things, which, yes, that's what they're there for. But they've also proven that that's not what they're doing.
Well, I mean, I've worked with certain departments within the government, and the one thing that is holistically true is that the amount of bureaucracy never allows for improvement or for things to work better. So there is no reward mechanism built in to do anything better or faster. Mm-hmm. The only reward mechanism is how much more expensive can we make and how many more people can we hire. So to me, obviously working in the technology field, that is 100%, 180% different than how they feel is how can we do things cheaper and faster. And the innovation comes from that field. Then I feel like there's this giant gap within the government. Now, granted, I do know that the government tries to do the best they can to enact these things, but fundamentally, it can't. It's that example of this person that you said, or these people that maybe you encountered that says, but we have this massive budget. I mean, if we cut the budget, we cut real people that might be watching this, like they won't have a job. What do we do then?
Well, and here's the thing too. It's like, I'll share an example, like a conversation that I was having with my son. Because this was after the whole abortion thing and like banning and making it illegal to have abortions.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so he was asking me and sharing his opinion, and he didn't understand why, right, certain laws were even created or whatever. And I said, well, here's the thing. Laws are meant to be black and white. They have to be black and white, because to be able to create a gray law, that just opens up way too many loopholes. It just really creates too much chaos when what they're trying to do is establish some kind of order. Regardless if you agree with it or not, that's for me what I think the government does when they're creating these laws. So, and that's how I explained it to him, because he's like, well, what about this? And what about that? I'm like, well, that's where you start to, go to court and you start to make amendments and whatever, situational based.
Well, then the law is interpreted.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's really difficult to say when it comes to lawmaking, again, creating a gray law. It's got to be black and white. Going back to the personal responsibility of the individual. And that's why I say it's like, I personally not that I don't believe, I just don't own a gun. I don't have anything against guns. I don't have an issue with guns. I just simply don't own one. Therefore, my children have not been around guns. It's just how it is. So when it comes to the gun laws, right, it affects me 0%. Like, if I choose to not own guns, regardless if I have the right to buy one or not, it's still my choice to have a gun. If I own a gun, it's also my responsibility to teach my children how to use them or, to care for them, whatever. So, but again, to blame the law that there's a gun laws out there, right, that allow us to purchase guns, that's irresponsibility. I feel that
Well, I mean, one of the things that I would challenge you with is, do you also believe that you hold this view because you've never had to deal with maybe a mass shooting or being a victim of gun violence?
I have been a victim of gun violence, and I work with children who are constantly a part of it. I also feel, something that I received a lot of backlash for is I spoke out after the gun shooting in Florida. And everybody's like, the laws, and that's when everybody was up in arms about it. And yes, absolutely. I do feel that laws are also there to be changed. But let's deal with what we have right now. right? What is going on right now? What can we actually do? And we still get to look at each individual and take responsibility. So these kids that are going out shooting, I've heard the argument of like, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And yeah, okay, but people stopped. People gave up on this kid long before he got the gun, had access to the gun. But nobody's talking about that, right? Nobody's talking about the fact that somebody knew that the October 1st shooter had issues and didn't say anything, right? Somebody knew that, all these people that are about to kill themselves, right? It's like, it's very rare that somebody doesn't give some kind of sign that is just randomly they snapped. It's very rare. And so the people around the ones shooting, killing, whatever you want to call it, they stopped. And they don't have the emotional fortitude to stand up and say, you know what? I gave up on that person. And that's where I say it's a huge irresponsibility of us, because we don't want to look at that. We don't want to say we failed my son. I failed my child or my friend, right? So
Well,
it's easier to just say it's the guns.
Okay, but you have two perspectives now, right? You have your perspective from saying somebody around that person failed them. But then you have to also see that from that other perspective, the victim of the situation would say, yeah, but I never had an option. And now I'm the one that has to deal with that person's choice.
Absolutely. But for me, long term, okay, this is what we're dealing with, right? So we have the victim and we have the shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Since we're talking about the whole gun laws, is changing the gun laws after the fact going to still help the victim? No.
No, and I think I maybe catching on a little bit what you're saying, that you can't have a one-sided solution.
Mm-hmm.
You have to say a problem is a little more.
It's multi-layered.
Right. And you're saying we need to start having real dialogue about true solutions that take the full spectrum of that, and start saying we can do these things in these different domains to help that thing, instead of just being very knee-jerk reaction to say what we need are more laws. And the reason is because laws are laws. They're on book. They have to be enforced.
And they do give us a sense of security, right? And they
Right.
give us a structure and a moral compass to abide by. And I get that. And I'm not negating that the use of laws is purposeful and meaningful. But what I'm saying is bringing it back, right? Is people lack the personal responsibility to step up and say, hey, I failed, right? Or and really look at what else could have been done. And so instead of raising your hand in anger and waving it like, oh, it's the guns. Okay, where could you done? Because it does take a village, right? It's like every interaction that we have affects each other.
But that is not our social construct that we have.
No, it's not. And that's why I'm saying I speak into it as like, you know what? Start taking a good hard look at yourself. And how did you contribute to this? How is it that and I'm not saying fault and blame, but we all get to look at that, and how are we responsible for it? Whether it is, did you vote? Did you not vote? Did you lobby? Did you not lobby? Did you teach your kids how to wash their hands to prevent germs? You know what I mean? It's like all of it matters. And for us to just simply say, oh, it's up to the government to decide, that's a very irresponsible way to live, in my opinion.
Well, do you feel, or not feel, but do you believe that maybe some people share that thought or that mindset? Because how else do they go and they prevent this from happening again? In their mind, maybe the only thing that makes sense is to change the law, because then it's actually enforceable, right?
Well, and like I said, it's like, I'm not saying don't change the law, right? Don't adjust them. I think that, as society grows and changes, and some things, do need to be adjusted for the social construct, right? Or our current reality. But in the meantime, right? There's more that can be done. There's definitely more that action that we can take when it comes to preventing these types of things. Because just because the law exists, just because I know that the red light means stop and the speed limit's at 55,
doesn't mean you would stop.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So there's that personal responsibility where it's, do I take the chance and just kind of run the red light and speed up at 75 and we all, and I know this is a blanket statement, but a lot of us do this where we push those boundaries.
Well, and you're bringing up a good point. I mean, that's why I started doing all this, and thank you so much for being my first guest. It's really, the idea is, why I came up with the name Life with Perspective was the idea that as long as you took on somebody else's perspective,
Mhm.
honestly, then it would change the way that you saw something because you have more information now and you can digest that. So the idea of you just blanketly saying everybody should kind of be responsible for their own actions doesn't equate change. It garners a response of like, well, fuck you.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Because it's very difficult for a normal person that's never done any type of like internal work or introspective work to say, I think I understand somehow I could do something. And we don't think of things in an individual nature to say, oh, I know that I could have done at least this much that maybe would have caused a difference in somebody else's life. Does that make sense? So because that's not what we are taught, that's not what we believe, and everything has to go back to a centralized way, this is the paradigm shift that I believe we all have to make individually to say, in order for us to change what we do not agree with, I have to take some level of personal accountability to say, but what am I doing at my level towards that?
And at the very least, not create more negativity, right? Which brings us back, like, this is the issue that I had with the conversation with this gentleman as far as the healthcare. It's like, I hear what you're saying. I get where you're coming from, and this is your perspective and worldview, but also understand that by what you're doing and saying that all illegals are getting healthcare and they're taking it away from the veterans, you're triggering some like anger and resentment to it and just stirring that angry pot, that's already happening. And so you're contributing to the negative reaction. And so that's why I'm saying at the very least, right, own that and say, this was my one-time experience where I had this issue happen, the end, right? And not say every immigrant, right? And not be that contribution. The other thing too, I feel that people should just learning how to respect opposing views and being okay with it. I work with kids, so I have a way of like trying to put everything into different like metaphors or whatever and analogies. And this one kind of took off. I don't like salsa, right? I hate salsa. I make the stuff, but I will not eat it. I know a lot of people come from a Hispanic family. Everybody's like, you're crazy. I may be. I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't prevent us from having a meal together, and you have your tacos with salsa and I have mine without, and we be able to coexist and enjoy a meal. You knowing that I don't like it, me knowing that you like it, me being completely okay with it, you disagreeing with the fact that I should, or shouldn't, if I should like it. It doesn't matter, right? And sometimes when we have those really, really like deep, emotions about somebody's perspective or argument or whatever, really just bring it down to that. It's really as simple as you like salsa and I don't, but it doesn't keep us from enjoying that meal.
How are you going to get there though, when maybe possibly the subject matter or something else is very near and dear to your heart, meaning you're taking it very personal, that maybe, maybe it directly contradicts your ideological belief.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you suggest to somebody that is in that situation?
Again, don't be a negative contributor. What I mean by that is, okay, I may sit here and argue a point and debate a point with somebody, right? And try to sway, because I think we all try to do that, right? Our purpose of communication
I
is
think
to
that's
be
called an argument.
right. But we're communicating in hopes to be understood. So if you and I are disagreeing, right? And I'm like, nope, salsa just sucks. And you're like, no, salsa is awesome. And we are having those like, very intense emotions about it.
Passionate discussion.
Right? It should be. But anyway.
Well, hold on. Because this is a big deal for me. You have to understand the difference between a discussion and an argument. And an argument is when you enter a conversation with somebody with the expressed idea that I'm going to convince you that I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
A discussion is when you enter a conversation by saying, this is what I know to be right, and I'm listening to what you know to be right. And then taking what you've said and see if any of that makes sense so that I can come up with maybe possibly a better way of explaining it. Or, you know what? You brought up some great points. Maybe I need to take a look at those, right? And it may not be at this time of the conversation, but it should be. I'm not going to leave that value on the table. I'm going to take that away and see if maybe I do change my mind. And if so, how does that create value back to everybody around me, right? So, and I think that that's not clear to everyone. That's not an experience that most people have, because I do believe a lot of people don't feel like they're heard.
Mm-hmm.
Think about maybe a female or male that are existing in relationship, and they feel like they have so much to offer the world, but yet nobody listens to them, not even their own partner. Mm-hmm. So then it becomes this, well, I'm so pent, or I need to express that now I'm going to be very, outspoken because nobody's listening. So do you see kind of like what I'm touching on is that this is all goes back to oneself and how they see things and how they're interacting with the world, not, oh, this is just an issue where I kind of get to dig my heels in. It's how am I willing to challenge my own belief about it, my own perspective. And I don't think that that's common out in the world, unfortunately. And I don't think anyone's going to look at this video and be like, that made a lot of sense. I'm just going to start doing that, because it requires a lot of work to understand what are the things in the way to do that every day.
Yeah. And that is like, there's so many communication tools and everything that you just like, I'm like, just the difference between an assertion and aggression and having all that. But bringing it back to what we were talking about in terms of the argument, right? If I feel so strongly about something and I was in a very superficial, light way, the salsa, not salsa, but let's talk about religion, right? That's a very big, triggering kind of conversation for most people. And I just say, even if I want to convince you to join my religion, or that my religion is right because I feel that I'm right and this is the only way and this is the right way, right? Obviously that's my faith, I'm deeply rooted, and my conviction is just, off the charts. There's no way you're going to talk me out of it. No amount of logic is going to talk me out of it. I'm willing to listen to you, right? And hear your opinions and say, okay, got it. And you're right. But I still feel that some kind of magical wand, right, and the spaceship is going to come down and save us all, and have it be that, right? And so I listened to you. There was nothing that you said that really changed my mind. And so now it's up to both of us, and that little cliche, agree to disagree.
Well, did you also consider it? I mean, I know you heard me, but what I was speaking into earlier is this idea that you have to be okay with challenging your belief system. And if you're not, then religion is the perfect example that unless you're willing to challenge it, all you're doing is constantly reaffirming it because you have to. Otherwise, you start exposing, the kink in the armor of saying, wow, am I questioning my faith? Am I questioning the realities that I hold so near and dear to myself? And if you start doing that, most religions start falling apart pretty quickly.
And I agree. And so, but what I was saying to you is in response to where you said, if you feel that you need to be right, right? And most people, I believe, when it comes to religion, they're very firm in that stance and are not willing to be wrong.
And what is that caused by, in your opinion?
That's a whole other conversation, but just because they're so fixed in their beliefs. That's the short answer. And so, but again, it's not up to me, right?
But isn't it a belief that this gentleman had about the immigration? Because it wasn't based on fact. It was based on the belief of information that he heard. He wasn't after the pursuit of the truth if it wasn't self-serving.
Right. So I feel that you're asking me two different questions. So let me address one in terms of and the reason I brought up religion, because again, people are so fixed in their beliefs and they're not willing to waver in any way. Still walking away with, okay, well, you're this religion and with that belief system, I have this one, but it doesn't take away who we are from, as individuals and what we can offer to each other. That's where I would say and invite people to be you get to disagree, agree to disagree, be open to having the conversation, seeing things in a different way. But at the end of the day, if you choose, you're not for me, I still think my spaceship is going to come, and get me, then you do that and feel comfortable enough and trust enough that your partner is not going to ridicule for that belief, right? Or put you down, or it's going to become a whole other thing. Back to this gentleman, when I had this conversation, of course, or an argument, because we were both wanting to be right. But for me, I was like, okay, is it possible to expand, right, your belief system and challenge it to where you see that not all, right, immigrants are taking from the veterans, that this may be just a very unique situation for you. And at the end of the day, he wasn't open to that. He felt that that was it. Okay. But at least I did my job. So going back to what are we doing, the personal responsibility, the action that we're taking, I at least attempted to inform this person, right? And whether I planted a seed or just completely didn't even penetrate at all, doesn't matter. I know that I was supporting him by trying to offer more information and walking away. And it's okay. So
how were you open to listening to what he had to say?
I was open because I understood where he was coming from. And I even say, I totally understand that this affected him in a personal way. And that's why he has that worldview. That's why he's coming from. So I completely understand. And I'm not negating what he's saying to be true to him. I am adding to the conversation by saying, consider the fact that you're now contributing to the negative pot, right? You're stirring that all the hate that's happening. And that's where I personally had an issue, where it's just just consider that.
But isn't that his experience? So how is he contributing negatively? He's just saying, hey, this is my truth and I'm speaking into it.
And it is. And again, it's
but he's not seeing it as you're seeing it.
Right.
He's seeing it as, I'm just telling you the truth that I know. And you're saying, well, there's a truth that I know. Right? And what I'm getting at is that there's still a gap.
There is a gap. And I don't think that you're ever going to be able to fully close the gap in communication and how people perceive and receive messages and all that stuff. All I can say is, again, it's that personal responsibility and do what you can. So, if we're going to ABC it out and step it out, I had this conversation with this gentleman, right? I invited him to explore other situations. I gave him my opinions. I gave him my facts, my truths. He gave me his. We both understood where we were coming from because he didn't negate it. And he's like, but I still think, this is messed up and I'm still going to continue to do this. And I'm like, okay. And I've had conversations with him since then and, it's totally fine. So we don't perpetuate this argument. It was just that. But then, and actually, which brought us where you and I started talking about it, I did make a post on it. It was very vague, saying, hey, and it was my truth, where I'm just getting a little frustrated when I see people, saying certain things or spewing certain stuff. And so that was my continuation. That was me saying, hey, here you go. Boom, done. Right. Which now led to you and I talking about it. And then we're now here about it. And so I'm doing what I can to counter, right, whatever it is in my belief. Because I could very well be the one stirring more negativity and not even be aware of it. Because that's the other thing too. Most people I don't think, consciously believe, right, and wake up every morning like, how am I going to screw people up today? How am I going to,
Right.
spew venom? So most people do operate on the good side of things, not knowing. And so that's where I just want to let people know, just be a little more conscious, right? Be a little bit more aware how every action has a reaction. How is this, contributing?
And I would think also another thing that you're saying is that not just to be aware, but to ever be so passionate about seeking out the truth instead of, and putting in your time to say, if I'm going to take responsibility of saying this, then I'm really going to go after at least some good hard facts, things that really matter, things that are real information. So that what if somebody like you comes around and says, look, you don't understand what you're talking about, immigrants don't take this, then I would say, look, I did my research. This is what they have planned. This is where I went. This is the number that they threw out. The place that I saw it from was very reputable. It was like a government agency, blah, 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 right? The idea is that then now we're having a different conversation. We're having a conversation about information that is available that we both can look at, and not opinions of the information that might exist.
Or at the very least, be aware of what's fact and what's opinion.
That is a difficult part because opinions are facts to people.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. But at least be aware, like when I say, okay, this is my opinion, I'm not like I don't have the statistics. I don't have that. Like I can just share my experience. And
so then
why.
Should I not value your come from if they're not based on facts?
I think
because you see that you just like opened yourself up for that one.
Right, absolutely. No. And that's the thing. It's up to you.
I would say my suggestion is try to approach everyone, even if it's opinion, even if you feel a certain way about it. Be open. Be open to the difference. Be open to having the discourse of, hey, you don't agree with me. Let me find out why.
Yeah.
Let me see why you say what you say. And if all you have and all you came with to this conversation that was impromptu, we didn't plan it, is an opinion, that is okay. How did you get to where you are with this opinion? What has happened in your life? Let me understand you as a person. What has shaped you and defined you? And if we are willing to care about others in that way, then we ourselves will learn something. Mm-hmm. Because I've yet to meet a person that I disagreed with that I didn't learn something from, right? And a good example for maybe hopefully people listening to this would be, we don't all hit the jackpot with parents. Right. It's just the honest truth. That doesn't mean that we can't learn from them. And that doesn't mean that they don't teach us amazing things. The amazing thing could be, don't do what I do.
Right.
That's not the superhero parents that maybe some of us would have loved to have, or the idea of like, I was raised by such great parents and look at me, I learned everything because that's what they did. You need to stand that on its head and say, thank you so much, parent, for at least showing me everything I shouldn't do. Mm-hmm. But we get to kind of make that, and we get to extract that value.
Well, that's a whole other conversation. I don't know. No, because like I've taught parenting classes, and one of the things that I tell them, and jokingly, right, just to break the ice, I tell the parents, I'm like, it's our job to screw up our kids. So you're doing great. And, they usually laugh or whatever. I'm like, the truth is, and this is the big key to parenting, kids are their own person, their own individual with their own perceptions. I have dealt with it with two, parent homes, affluent, given the world to the child, and the child views these parents as bad parents.
Right.
I've seen it in broken homes where they're poor and you're pretty much walking on crack pipes and they just think that mom's the greatest. Ultimately, the child's going to decide. And they're going to formulate their own opinion and have their own perception of their childhood. The parent has no control over that.
No, right. And it's a good point that you're making. I'm saying it to whoever's watching this. The idea is that you're the child.
Right. Okay.
And you have to look at everything happening around you
Okay.
with the same discourse to say, no matter whether I believe it's positive or negative, what can I learn from this right now? Because there's always something to learn. And if you want to challenge me on that, challenge me. Next time you run into some fucking asshole that's making your day shit, take the time to understand them. Yes. Be the difference out there to say, instead of me arguing with you, instead of me coming at you with my opinion, let me take a second and just understand how your opinion got formed and how you became to be the person that you did. Because if you do, I don't believe that it's going to make you agree with them, but it is going to give you the capability to see it through somebody else's perspective in that different mindset. And that is what you will walk away with, you, whoever's watching. That's your value. You created that. Now take that and do it over and over again daily. You will see that your life will change drastically because now you are consuming life lessons from people instead of just walking around every day with your blinders on, never looking at your full scope of what you experience everyday life. And this is what I'm hoping is going to happen with these podcasts, is that with having great guests like you and other people come through, is challenging yourself to say, no matter how much I disagree with you, there has to be a reason why, and I need to find out why I disagree with you. And me personally, and I think you and I have disagreed about a few things, and we've talked about it, and you've been kind enough that no matter what we disagree on, you're willing to have that conversation. You're willing to take the time. And it's not been always an argument. It's been about, I don't get you right now, but I'll think about it. And it's not like, okay, great, when do I call you back by? It's cool. Well, I need to do the same thing for you. I don't agree with what you said, but I should probably think about it. We're not going to agree, but the idea is, I think I understand you better.
Yeah.
Still don't agree with you, but I understand you better. And that has given a rise to what? Maybe there's other things I don't understand. Maybe there's other things that maybe you see differently than me. And that's a good thing because I need perspective sometimes, right? When I go through some hardships or when I go through something that I don't know how to handle, you might have done that already. You might have done it differently. So hopefully you'll have like, wow, that was a very healthy way that you overcame something, and I can maybe take some of that knowledge. Or, wow, thank you so much for sharing. Absolutely, I won't do what you just fucking did.
Right? Like, big mistake.
But either way, right? The idea is that I can create value from it. And that's what I'm hoping that people can see from you talking about all these things that you've done and some of the experiences that you had, and speaking into the challenges that you deal with or things that you experience on your own, and say, yeah, you're not coming at it from a negative perspective. You're not trying to shit on people. What you're trying to say is like, look, man, there's more to this.
There's always more to the story. And I think what I wanted to share and just add to is the contrast, right? It's if you look at it from a contrast, not as a negative or anything, like the contrast shows you what you don't want at the very least. Right. So it's like if you are experiencing like you have no money, you're just having a really crappy day and your life is really sucky. You are now aware of what you don't want and what you do want. Because sometimes we run around not knowing what it is that we want or not knowing what it is that we think or feel about a subject until we experience the contrast. Like sometimes that's the wake up call to where it's like, wait a minute, I don't want that. That's not for me. You know what I mean? And so it gives us that starting point. So yeah, like you said, it's like I can share something with you and be like, yeah, this is how I did it. Again, it may be not in alignment to what you want, but it gives you a starting point and be like, yeah, that's not the way to go. It's like, so still appreciating and finding value in that, is just to echo your point. And I think that's super important about, and walking away, having it be okay. That's where I said, it's just, agreeing to disagree. This is your point of view. and again, I don't know how much time, but a story came up.
No, go ahead. We have all the time you want.
And this was on religion. And so I tend to be and was a lot more. What? Keep breaking your stuff. Tend to be. Yeah, I used to poke holes on religion a lot. And I used to say and question people, that really believed in the Bible. And this was kind of
believed or do believe?
Do believe.
Okay.
I speak in the past because this happened years ago, like 10, 15 years
right.
ago. And I would say well, you know what? I'm 100% bilingual. I can read and write and everything 100% both in English and Spanish. And I happen to know that it is impossible to literally translate anything from one language to another. And I also know that back in the day when the Bible was written, it was very limited. There were very few people that could actually read and write, and were able to, create these scrolls and scribes and everything. More so translated, there was less people than that. And so the question that I would pose onto these, big believers would be, so how can you guarantee me that something hasn't been taken out, added, that somebody, 100 years ago was sodomized, so now they feel that homosexuality is bad, right? And they just added it in there. And so how can you guarantee me that? In English, there's been several versions. Languages, there's so many. And generally that question would enrage people. I can't tell you how many people I've asked that over the years, and they would just piss them off.
Yeah, because you're asking them to defend something that is indefensible.
Yes. And so, however, there was one woman, and she is the only person that I will accept that answer from. I'm phrasing this wrong. She's the only woman that I will not argue that answer with, even though.
Why is that?
While the others became very defensive and they started to condemn me and just do all kinds of stuff, she said to me, she's like, the Holy Spirit was sent to embody or take over the person's body and help them guide them through the translating, scribing process. I don't personally believe that. I don't believe that happened. However, her belief in it was so real that I was like, okay, it allowed me to understand where she came from. It was a spiritually logicked, kind of thing. I was able to see her come from, and it was such a genuine view. Again, it didn't make me be like, okay, this is the truth. This is it. But it was enough for me to be like, okay, I respect that answer.
So it's more of the value that she generated for himself from the belief was, at least you experienced it to be rather high. So the idea then became, well, it's not about the logic of it. It's about, it looks like it's genuinely creating a positive outcome in your life because you believe in it.
Yeah. And even the way she was being about it, because again, the other reactions that I had received, and there was also something else that she did where the others didn't. Again, they condemned me, they rejected me, they insulted me, they just, just yelled at me. Some of them did. Where she's like, she had a level of compassion for me. She didn't get mad at me. She gave me that explanation and allowed me and opened herself up to ask questions. She's like, obviously, you're confused. You have questions. You want to know more about this. So ask away.
So, I keep hearing that this is about your interpretation of it, not for you to reach a point where both of you guys came to a mutual conclusion. Just because she made you feel a certain way, you were then willing to say, well, we're good. I don't need to continue this further. Because you had such a vile reaction from other people, then it almost amped you up to go even harder. Yeah. So are you not?
Well, actually, what I'm doing is I'm exemplifying what you were talking about in terms of having those arguments, being open and willing to understand other people. And she was one of the first persons to show this concept to me, to where it's okay to not agree or believe in what I believe in. Let's have this open conversation. Let's explore, see if I can change your mind. Because ultimately, I think that's what we want to do. But then still be okay if you don't. And be like, okay, and learn from that. So from her, I may have not learned or even, really subscribe to the belief of Christianity and all this other religion stuff. But I learned compassionate understanding and listening. And that was my takeaway from it. So for her, she may have wanted to, kind of join her church, and I wanted to piss her off. Neither one of those initial intentions came true or came to fruition, but we both walked away with a different understanding of each other. And we agreed to disagree. And that's just kind of how it works. I feel that that's where we can make things better. We can start to shift and create those changes that we want to see.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible just one conversation at a time and just accepting of each other's different point of views or perspectives or whatever.
And so maybe that day, that's a learning lesson that you wanted to take away from it.
Yeah.
Because logically, it still doesn't stand up to your original discussion with those other people, like as far as you being logical and taking that. But you took something away from it, and you were like, well, this is good. I'm imparting something. Hopefully she does too. And you're walking away in a different way, right? Like you're walking away in a better person in your mind. Like I get where she's coming from. This is all good.
Right. And so, yeah, that's where I was saying it's like it exemplifies the whole, like maybe intentionally or initially we may have the intention of trying to convince each other of something. Right. And where I wanted to poke those holes and just, piss people off because that's what I do. She taught me a very compassionate way to look at things and here's how powerful that was. Right. That even though I can sit here today and say logically, I don't buy into it. I still don't agree with it. But with her, I don't want to poke that hole. I don't want to.
And why is that?
Because again, we had that growth experience of she was able to turn the situation around into a compassionate, empathetic situation. And I was able to grow and learn from it. Does that make sense? Like, whereas the others were just instantly wanting to reject. And
but it still comes back to me being a you thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
Of like you, and the things that how I feel like people hopefully can get out of this is that you need to be open to change yourself along with other people, but it shouldn't be a one over the other. It should be, but how are we doing this together? So if I was in your situation with that woman, I still would have spoken to her about, look, this is great, but you need to understand that maybe you're creating this value for yourself from an idea, and it's not the idea initiating it, but it's you using the idea for yourself. So like free yourself from these binds that you have, because that's where the real value is, right? So in my view, I'm sure you share the same thing. By no means do I'm saying something that I don't think you would have done. But in my mind, like when I have those experiences, that's ultimately always my driving factor, is to say, that's great what you said, but let's both understand where the value is being created, right? Like root cause analysis. Like let's look at this and say, what is the actual thing making that change in your life? Because if we can understand it together, maybe I get something out of that. Maybe I'm like, oh, I see that maybe I need to go do this with myself and my own belief systems. Because if you could do this thing and it's repeatable, meaning you and I can talk about it and you're like, yeah, I get that too. I'm like, wow, maybe we can now share it with somebody and they get it. And they're like, yeah, I'm free now. I don't have to. It's almost like, believing that your belief in or the confidence in yourself is because you are with somebody, instead of, well, no, it's just yourself. You need to detach that from that other person and realize that the value is your own.
Yes.
But that's me,
Whoops.
right?
See, I keep doing this thing.
Don't worry, it just tightens. To me, that's kind of where I push for. So I wouldn't have been done with that conversation, because to me, I'm like, this is a me thing, right? Just like you have your thing. My thing is like, I need to push until we all can understand, where we are all on the same plane and we can all look at it objectively and say, yeah, that makes sense. Because if not, then there's more learning to be had.
Absolutely. But I think it's also so many other factors to take into consideration. And I don't think it's always possible in the moment. Like, I think it's possible where you can generate mutual growth.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes it's just about what I got, right? And then sometimes it's about creating value for you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really knowing. And in that particular situation, like she and I used to work together. So we used to have so many different conversations. And
I do not suggest that to anyone to have this conversation with people you work with.
No, please don't. Like, no, we just had that, rare type of relationship. And, yeah, especially religion at work. Don't do it. But we just point is we spent so much time together that there was so many opportunities to give and take, right? And give or take. It just really, so I think being aware of that too, which actually rewinding back to the original point, I think that's a huge, what did I call it? Competency of a coach is to know what moment when is it okay for us to learn from each other? Because I think that can actually happen. There's a partnership that happens when you're coaching. When is it all about you, the client? When is it about me? Even like maybe I need to create that value and that, worth, so to speak, or edify myself or whatever for the client to be able to trust me. And there's a certain dance, right? And you got to be aware of this. And when you're creating a coaching space for your client, and being able to read, right. And know that even if their worldview is completely opposing to yours, one, either recognize that, you know what, this is not okay. I'm just instantly triggered if you bring this up. So this is not going to work. Or even put it out there and say, hey, you know what, like, I just have to let you know this is something, and just being able to handle it, right? Versus trying to ignore it or whatever. Because there's plenty of ways that we as coaches also generate value for ourselves when we're doing a coaching session with a client.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of them. But you've got to be aware of yourself. You've got to be able to know, like, oh, this is me. Keep going, right? Like, I'll deal with this later.
No, that's great. So, I mean, with that, do you want to maybe tell people where they can find you, what some like the website maybe they can go to, how to reach out to you, or anything else that you might want to share with them?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just like, where's my mind going right now? Facebook is honestly the quickest way to find me by name, which is Angie Amico. But primarily my agency name is Life Changing Solutions, and that is everything. The website, I have a Facebook page, I have a YouTube channel. Everything is Life Changing Solutions.
And I'll put it in the description too, just to make it a little easier when I release this. You'll have all the little links out for all the little stuff that you want to share. Yeah. So with that, thanks everyone. I really appreciate you guys watching this. Thank you for doing this with me. I appreciate you roughing through this first one, but you guys didn't see a bunch of technical issues beforehand. But thank you. I appreciate it. And hopefully you'll come back on.
Absolutely. No, I was excited. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. With everybody, have a great one.